Hello, I'm Susan Horwitz, Director of Sport New South Wales. Welcome to the continuing conversation with leaders in the corporate and the sporting world. We focus on the ideas that have shaped these leaders and led them to make changes in the organisations they lead and in their own lives. Today I'm talking with Catherine Harris, who's the co-founder and chair of Harris Farm Markets and a commissioner on the Australian Rugby League. Welcome, Cathy.
Thank you.
Now, Cathy, you have served in and continue to serve in many leadership positions. Earlier in your career, you were appointed as the Federal Director of the Affirmative Action Agency. And that was heady stuff back then, wasn't it? And here we are in 2017, 20 odd years later, and still struggling a bit with this gender equality to be adopted widely in the country. Why do you think Australia is still sort of dragging the chain on this? Do you think it will happen in our lifetime?
I think it's a long way to happening, but not out of any sense that people don't want it to happen. But there is such a male culture engendered into Australia that we were a very tough country. We were born with it. I mean, we were sort of came about by convicts and fighting, and it was tough for the people out there then. And I think that has remained, and we idealised that form of tough. I mean, you know, like the early poems that we all used to love and hear, and so I think that culture has remained, and so has it changed? I remember when I first was made Director of Affirmative Action, it was such an unpopular, I'm sure you'd remember, such an unpopular piece of legislation. And I thought, well, how am I going to change this? I was, first-time public servant. I had no idea how you change things in the public service. But I'm also a marketer, and I thought, we're not going to win this by telling companies they've got to do it. Because their drive is obviously shareholder wealth. It's not, to do support. So I started the line of it's good for business, and that went down fairly well. And we certainly started seeing some changes, and certainly a lot of companies began making the right noises. So we went through that stage. Then I think I realised that a lot of companies knew how to make the right noises and sound like the right thing, but the problem was actually having the heart and the will to do it. And so now I've totally changed my attitude. And I was sitting in a meeting recently and we were talking about how to get the gender balance better, and somebody said, well, we'd like to have the business reasons for having to do this. And I turned around and I said, I'm sorry, unless we want to do it, it's not going to happen. It's got to come from the heart. You've genuinely got to want it to happen. And that really happens, I think, when men have daughters. When they suddenly see their daughters, they go, oh my God, my daughter is brilliant, is not getting the partnership in the law firm she wanted to go to. And so it's that want that we're still trying to get there with.
Yes, and I think just following that, I think a lot of, despite good intentions, many major Australian companies are struggling to actually meet their own targets for diversity and gender themselves.
Yeah.
And many nations have successfully adopted a quota system.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's the next step?
We've certainly got to do something that makes it normal for women to be in the room, because there is still, I know I feel it, sometimes where people assume if I go somewhere, David and I go somewhere together, that people will talk to David, not really in fact that he is there as my partner, just as when I go with him. Let me tell you, sometimes the opposite happens. But there is the assumption still there that the man is going to be the leader. So how do we change that? By, of course, having much more visibility of women in leadership roles. So I always fought against the idea of quotas, but maybe that's just our rush wanting to be there. I don't know whether that's going to be the answer or not, but maybe that is going to have to be the answer.
I know that some men who have been running companies have said, I think it's only going to work when every CEO makes gender equity an issue on all profit lines. So as much as you're scrutinised and given KPIs on profit and loss and margins and everything, you still have to have the KPIs on your gender mix and your diversity.
Yeah.
And until that happens, that people are actually measured on that, it may not move very fast.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think those KPIs have been in place for a long time in a lot of organisations. And I think that a lot of organisations get frustrated by doing the numbers. They see it as the numbers. I think it's a matter of having courageous people making decisions to appoint women to places where they wouldn't otherwise think of it. Again, it comes back to having the visibility of women in leadership positions. And successful women, of course.
Yes, not token.
Not token. And not also, allowing women to take the fall. When the time comes that there is a big mistake, it's so often the woman that gets up and says, well, we made a mistake, as opposed to, if it's the CEO, as opposed to the chairperson.
Exactly.
I can think of a certain case recently, which we won't go into, but do you know what I mean? It's often, yes, yeah.
Cathy, given your wide-ranging experience, what have you found to be effective in leading a business? And what have you learned to avoid?
I think the one thing that I've realised is one style doesn't fit all. When David and I were working together, we were always working together. And that is a totally different leadership style than I did some work in defence, for example. It is an entirely different style, so you have to be flexible. But I think what does work, I think the most important thing that now that I'm so much older and I look back on things is don't be afraid to have the conflict. Everybody talks, so many often you say to people, I've got a consultative style. Well, quite frankly, I think a bit of conflict is good. But if you can do conflict in a way that listens to the other person and puts your point of view and doesn't get emotional, you get much better decisions that come out of that, as opposed to just going, oh, right, and, and not being afraid to have those very tough decisions and making decisions. And I don't think that's consultation. I think that is quite sophisticated awareness of what your own personal strengths and weaknesses are, as opposed to, and knowing the person sitting opposite you, strengths and weaknesses.
So a key driver for you is to be direct.
Yes, I think so. And I think most boards I'd sit on say, well, that's Kath. Yeah.
So you've touched on it a little bit. I was going to ask you whether you think there are similarities in running a commercial enterprise and overseeing a national sporting organisation, or are they very different beasts that require, a very different approach? I know you talked about a family company, but I know you are involved in other businesses as well.
Yeah.
How do you see that mix?
Sport is very different, especially a sport such as rugby league. And rugby league, and people just don't realise how huge rugby league is. Like, we just recently had the State of Origin. State of Origin 2, we would have had over 4 million people in Australia watching the State of Origin last night on television. So this is a huge organisation which is owned by the people. And so it's more like politics than like running a business. And I think that is the mistake that so many people they make of not realising that this is politics. And so it's about getting a whole lot of different ideas and trying to keep people together. And there's the other element in sport always is passion. You don't get to be successful without having this unbelievable drive. And so you see really good sports people, very driven by their opinions and their point of view, and that's how they were so successful. So again, that's a different element that you don't get in business, that passion, that drive, and also the politics of it.
Women in sport. Let's look at that.
Yes.
It's exciting times emerging for our female athletes. We're seeing a lot of good initiatives out there. What do you think is working, and where would you like to see some improvements with these developments?
I heard in Victoria that a number of councils are now saying that they won't let sporting organisations have grounds if they don't have a women's team, or women are not allowed to play in their team. So, wow, that's going to be a huge driver to people start going, oh, well, maybe we should have more with our women's game, maybe things. So I think that's a really interesting thing.
I should add also that's happening in New South Wales.
Oh, it is happening in New
Yes,
South
it's
Wales.
something that Sport New South Wales is very
Right.
involved with councils.
Yes.
Making sure that in the social justice principles that they are working on that, and we're getting some good results.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I think it's a very difficult thing with sport being involved, obviously with rugby league. I see behind the scenes that sport is paid for by people watching it and the sponsors. And of course the big money sponsors are around gambling and alcohol and things like that, which is, a difficult area. There is so much focus on men's sports, whereas women again don't get the visibility, despite the fact, for example, in the Olympics, 60% of our gold medals were won by women. And something like, I think, 66% of our world-class athletes in Australia are all women. And the Matildas in soccer are number 8 in the world, whereas Socceroos are only 50 or something like that. So...
And the women's cricket.
And women's cricket,
yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Australia's number 1.
So what's working? I don't know what's working. You feel the swell, you feel the interest, you feel people genuinely being interested in it. Even in rugby league, they've got a fantastic team, and we've got an international team that's out there, and it's amazing to watch, to be involved with, and women love it.
Do you think it's going to be a long wait ultimately for females to be paid the same as male?
A third it
athletes?
is now. Can you imagine in any other industry if women got a third the pay of men? So overall it's a third. Well, it goes back to what are the drivers? Who finances the game? The government. I think the government is doing their bit, which is fabulous, and they are the ones. But as long as the viewers, the number of the rest of sport is paid by media and by sponsors. So we have to start getting sponsors that really care about women, like the supermarkets and things like that, to help get the women's games up and financial.
Just talking about the NRL, what do you think, have they achieved success in changing a traditionally male culture? How is that going?
Do you know, inside the NRL, I was having breakfast 2 days ago with Raylene Castle, who's the CEO of the Bulldogs. And both of us agreed, we'd both worked in many organisations, to actually work inside NRL. It is one of the most female-friendly cultures we've ever been in. There is inside NRL itself, there is none of that. There's not that culture, because I think the NRL, women have always, in actual fact, been very involved. It may be sometimes a bit patronising, and they say, yes, they've always been involved as volunteers and things like that, but it's been more than volunteers. And there is a deep respect within rugby league and rugby league players about women and their mothers. So they're really inside the NRL. Now, the image on the outside is something, and I go back to saying how popular it is. There's just 1 or 2 players that mightn't be up there and do the wrong thing. And because it is so popular, it gets so much more airing. And I remember recently there was a young man in the NRL that did something that was inappropriate It was not illegal, but it got so much press, it was unbelievable. Now, in that very same week, there was a major publicly listed ASX 2000 company, who I won't name, that the CEO and the senior managers were going at lunchtime to a restaurant that had, women without gear on. I mean, and I thought, the NRL is getting all this focus, and that is happening in, I mean, it was a big drama at the time, but it only got maybe a day's news, whereas the NRL, it went on and on and on and on. So I think people have sort of got a bit of perspective that they've got to get in that. So I'm a great supporter of the NRL. I can tell you I have met some of the nicest people, and the young men who play the game who are genuinely just the nicest people. And it's such a pity that it gets that focus.
But the work is being done there
The
culture is changing.
The culture is really changing. The culture is changing because people realise that is how you get sponsors, how you obviously, get the individuals get job afterwards. So yes, the culture is changing.
Now, just on a totally different thing, I have one final question for you.
Oh, this will be good.
I've got to mention your most recent business venture, which is to breed and ride Icelandic horses.
Correct.
Now, is this is very different, of course, but is this a further effort of bringing diversity into Australia, Kathy? What's happening there?
I think this is a little bit of my husband's madness, I have to tell you. Both of us are retiring. We've got the 3 boys taking over the business. And we're mad keen horse riders. And Icelandic horses are wonderful, strong horses, but they're smaller. It means old people like us can get on them. They're incredibly gentle. They're more like a dog than a horse. They rush up to you and nip you, and you can get on them easily because they're not so tall. So we love it.
Oh, excellent. Well, Kathy, thank you very much. It's been great to talk to you.
Lovely. Thank you very much.